So last night was the second Democratic debate, which was the one I was waiting for. I didn't do a video on the first Democratic debate because it's kind of nobody I cared about in it. I mean, sure, it had Warren and Bernie, but I think they're both, looks to be at this point that they're both flaming out. And both of the interesting people, Yang and Tulsi, were in the second night. So I didn't really pay attention at all to the first night. I don't think that much of it will matter. I mean, that Tim Ryan guy was in the first night's debate, and I mean, who wants to watch him? He's just kind of a creep. But it also seems, based on what was seen last night, it seems that all of the more reasonable, moderate voices were confined to that first night's debate, going up against Warren and Bernie, which probably made it a little bit interesting, but, you know, a moderate by Democrat standards is still nowhere near where I am. I have the very controversial opinion of thinking that capitalism works just great if you keep your mitts off of it, which nobody in the Democratic Party, certainly, and nobody in the Republican Party actually believes in. So I've pretty much written off mainstream politics when it comes to economic matters, so I don't get too upset about that anymore. It used to drive me nuts when I would hear people say ridiculous things about the minimum wage and such, about how, Bernie's saying, like, oh, this will be great. All these folks, they'll get a raise. Ho ho. When in reality, the folks who are going to get a raise are just going to have to work more to produce that much, and then they're going to have to lay some people off, or they're going to have to work longer hours, or they're going to cut their hours back, and they're going to be expected to do the same amount of work in less hours, and that's will make up for their increased pay. But, I don't care about that stuff anymore. Pretty much all that phases me really is the war stuff, which is why I am so interested in the performance of Tulsi Gabbard last night. Tulsi, I think, did pretty well. Could she have done better, in my opinion? Sure, but, I'm not really somebody who cares about the political stuff. I think that what she did last night was a much better performance for her than in the first debate, because she talked about things the Democrat voters actually care about. Most people who are voting in the Democratic primary, I don't think really care that much about the anti-war stuff. But what I'm hoping is that Tulsi is able to package the anti-war stuff in with some of the more, I mean, she can't go full SJW because that's just not her, but if she gets a little bit SJW packed in there to make the anti-war medicine go down, a spoonful of left-wing sugar to make the anti-war message go down, I'm very happy with that. And that seemed to be what she did last night, because she came out swinging against old Narc Harris, Kamala Harris, who is, if for those of you who don't know, was a narc. She threw folks in jail for doing drugs, for smoking weed even. She loved to be a tough-on-crime prosecutor in San Francisco, where, of course, right now there's a huge drug problem. And this, of course, is not something that really lines up with the Democratic Party right now. Democrats are not supposed to be the tough-on-crime folks who want to throw nonviolent drug offenders in prison. But this is something that Harris uniquely has been able to brag about throughout her career. I guess she has a little bit more breathing room since, she's an off-white, female. I can't really call her a woman of, she's not really black, so she's not that dark, kind of like Cory Booker, so I guess calling her off-white is probably the best classification. But, she has that going for her, and she's a woman, so I guess she can get away with, being tough on crime a little more than, say, Joe Biden can, even though Joe Biden has been, potentially the most tough on crime. Well, no, he's not quite as much as Harris, but he's still pretty tough on crime throughout his career, because that used to be a big thing in the Democratic Party. Obviously, in the last few years, pretty much, I guess, with the Obama administration, being a little more open to the idea that people might have a problem with, with the cops, and that perhaps, locking someone in jail for a substantial period of time over drug possession, maybe that's not the best idea. That seems to be the way that the zeitgeist has been moving. So that creates an opening for someone like Tulsi to come in and say, hey, Cammie H., you've been on the wrong side of this issue, and what are you going to do about that? She accused her of withholding evidence that could have set a man on death row free. That's a serious charge. That's attempted murder, what Tulsi just said there. And Kamala Harris did not deny it, not in any of her interviews, and she had a lot of interviews where folks asked her about this, and all she did was deflect, and call Tulsi an Assad toady, basically, like that New York Times woman did on Joe Rogan, which, of course, is a ridiculous neocon smear. I mean, if I were Tulsi, I would have just said, it's very convenient that Kamala's whipping out the same insults used by the most hawkish right-wingers. That would have been my response if I were Tulsi, because, of course, that is a very neocon ultra-hawk position to have, that anyone who perhaps doesn't want to go to war with a certain country obviously loves that country's leader. They said the same thing about folks who opposed the Iraq War, that you were told if you didn't like the Iraq War, well, why do you love Saddam Hussein so much? All we want to do is free the poor Iraqi people of their terrible oppressive dictator and replace him with the Dawa Party, which are, for those of you who don't know, the Dawa Party are literal puppets of the Iranian government, who today we're told is also terrible. If you oppose that sort of a government being imposed in Iraq, well, then you just love Saddam Hussein. Of course, there aren't too many serious people who still say that. I think the last person I heard utter those ridiculous words was Eli Lake, who I believe he writes for Bloomberg Opinion, maybe? So obviously this is a very weak deflection on Harris's part. I don't think there are a lot of people buying that, anyone who opposes war with Syria, which is something that is universally, there is bipartisan consensus among voters, going to war in Syria is a bad idea. Nobody thinks that would be good. If you're saying that Tulsi, who virulently opposed this even when there was a Democratic president, which is a tough thing to do, that makes her an Assad toady. The fact that she was willing to meet with leaders of a country that you don't like. If your rule is if I don't like a certain world leader, I'm just not going to meet with them and I'm going to bomb them until they do what I want. That leads to, wars in, just about every country in the world, because you're going to have disagreements with folks from time to time. And you know what? We can't control the whole world. And sure, Assad's a bad guy. So was Saddam Hussein. So was Mr. Kim from North Korea. So was Joseph Stalin. Does that mean that we can fix everything in the world? Are we God? Well, apparently, if you say no, if you say perhaps we're a little overextended, perhaps we should, perhaps I don't think that, I think that we shouldn't let any Americans die in Syria for no good reason, well then I guess you just love Assad. Now, after the first debate, even though Tulsi did pretty well, she was doing well reacting against a man by the name of Tim Ryan, who no one had heard of. So I think that Tulsi going after a big player tonight like Harris did herself a lot more good, and maybe this will manifest itself in the polling results after this debate. Because her numbers really didn't move at all after the last debate, despite her being the most Googled candidate. And of course, she had some trouble with her Google ad service at that point and is the subject of a lawsuit that I won't get into here. But hopefully, Tulsi was able to snag away some supporters from Harris, and if not Harris, maybe some of the other candidates. Because I would hope that the alternative to the establishment, which really right now seems to be Harris, everyone seems to be trying to use Biden as a straw man to knock down so that Harris can look like she's not the establishment person and like she rose from the ashes. But Harris very clearly at this point seems to be the DNC favorite. I would like to see Tulsi in particular rise against Harris because Tulsi's the only one who really has that good anti-war message. Now, of course, the other candidates, if you ask them, straight up, hey, was the Iraq War a good idea? None of them will say, that it was a great idea, because that would be political suicide in this day and age. You find very few, even Republicans, who will say the Iraq War was a good idea. But they aren't, they aren't well read on the topic like Tulsi is. They wouldn't actually be able to converse with their advisors. They would pretty much listen to whatever the foreign policy establishment told them to do. They have no agency in this area. They don't really care about it. Most of them care about, economics, and it just so happens that the things that they care the most about are what they know the least about. Tulsi, however, the thing that she cares the most about, war, is what she knows the most about. Because, of course, just like all the other Democrats, Tulsi is not particularly well read in the topic of economics, at least based on what I've heard from her. And so yet again after this debate, Tulsi was the most Googled candidate, and I hope that persists. Because at the very least, I want her to stick around for a few more debates so she can make some good anti-war statements. I really would like to see her pull the field in a more anti-war direction, just in the way that Bernie in 2016 pulled Hillary in a more to the left. Because as of right now, there is no anti-war party. There's just one big war party, and it's a bipartisan party. And, the closest thing to an anti-war voice we have right now is President Trump, because he ran on being a pretty anti-war candidate. But unfortunately, he's been pretty well subsumed by his advisors. He still says good things if you ask Trump himself directly, but the problem is he's so easily persuaded, it seems, by other folks who, are nice to him, that he's not not really able to get his things through. And he's put up quite a bit of resistance to the national security state. I'll give him that, but not enough. Like when he wanted to say, hey, we're pulling out of Syria, it became, okay, well, we'll pull out in 3 months. Oh, okay, we'll leave a few hundred troops, which is not a full pullout. And of course, they got him to stay in Afghanistan forever, but it seemed at first, because Trump originally said, hey, we're getting right out of Afghanistan as soon as I'm in. And then he said, okay, well, I've talked it over with the generals, and they say we need to stay in Afghanistan, so we're staying. But now there is those great negotiations going on with Zalmay Khalilzad, who is a neocon, between him and the Taliban, trying to work out a peace deal so that the U.S. can withdraw. So I would hope for the world's sake, that will bear fruit soon. So Trump hasn't been a total disaster in foreign policy. Hillary would be unquestionably worse, since she was a full-on war hawk, not just an uninformed dove like Trump. But Tulsi on war is even better, because Tulsi, not only is she a dove, but she's well informed, at least to a certain extent. And by that I mean she understands that there's a difference between Sunni Muslims and Shia Muslims. Back during the days of the Bush administration and the Obama administration, we were led to believe that there's just this amorphous blob of what is known as radical Islamic terror, and that we were supposed to conflate the folks in Iran with Al Qaeda like they're the same people, when in reality they hate each other's guts, because it's like it's like the Protestants and the Catholics. Tulsi seems to be the only person who's run for president ever, and by that I mean in the last couple cycles, where this has been an issue, who understands that there's a difference between Sunni and Shia, and that you have to play off those two against each other, and that not all Muslims are created equal. So when you topple a secular Sunni dictator like Saddam Hussein in Iraq, you're obviously going to empower the Shia majority, who then are going to be aligned with Iran. So if your goal was to, contain Iran and keep them from spreading their influence across the Middle East, well, then obviously you wouldn't topple Saddam Hussein. Now, the same is true if your enemy is Al Qaeda. And Al Qaeda is one of the strongest presences of fighters fighting against Bashar Al Assad in Syria, who is he's an Alawite, which is kind of like a Shiite, but aligned with the Shiites. By toppling that non-Sunni dictator, you're very likely going to empower Al Qaeda, because that's who's fighting against Assad. So that doesn't mean that you love Assad. It means that, hey, Al Qaeda attacked us on 9/11, and if somebody's killing Al Qaeda, maybe we should just let them do that. Maybe if we toppled Assad, things would get even worse, because Al Qaeda would have more room to grow. It would be that so-called safe haven myth that they always touted about Afghanistan. That actually could happen in Syria. It certainly has happened in Libya, where Obama toppled Muammar Gaddafi. That has become a total al-Qaeda safe haven. And, of course, in Yemen, where the U.S. and Saudi Arabia are trying to take down the Shiite Houthis. Well, I don't even know if the Houthis are Shiites, to be honest, but they're now affiliated with Iran, because they're their only friend on the international stage, since the Saudis and the U.S. are attacking them. Well, who is it that the U.S. and the Saudis are empowering in Yemen? It's Al-Qaeda. So on that depressing note, I think I'll end my very drawn-out and rambly analysis of Tulsi's performance in the Democratic debate there. If you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and subscribing. And if you do subscribe, please do click the bell, because I do upload every day, and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.